Welcome to Professor Burkett's lesson on sentence patterns, also known as identifying clauses. And this is the first lesson in the art of grammar, or what the Greeks called techne grammaticae. This lesson focuses on the four kinds of clauses. And sentence patterns are based on kinds of clauses, including the following: the main or independent clause, and three kinds of dependent clauses: the adverb or subordinate clause, the adjective or relative clause, the noun clause, and from each of these four categories there are elliptical clauses where certain words are missing but implied. William Safire rightly writes, "A dependent clause is like a dependent child, incapable of standing on its own, but able to cause a lot of trouble." Why should writers know their clauses? Well, rules of writing emphasize well-formed clauses always in the three categories of grammatical and stylistic rules. Regarding rules of grammar, which is important for making sense in communication, meaning depends on how well writers form clauses and punctuate stops and starts between clauses. Regarding rules of usage, of what's called proper or social grammar, writers need to inform readers where one clause or sentence stops and the next begins. And regarding rules of style, writers need to manage, coordinate, and even play with sentence patterns to grow as writers and thinkers. I like what Erasmus of Rotterdam, the prince of the humanists, during the Renaissance had to say about this. God does not much mind bad grammar, but he does not take any particular pleasure in it either. Well, some key terms before we start. A grammatical sentence refers to a structure of logical relationships consisting of the union of a subject, a finite verb, as opposed to an infinitive, and any objects or complements. Thus, we talk about subject-verb-object or subject-verb-complement syntax in English. The classical Greeks also defined sentences by grammatical form: subject plus predicate, where the predicate refers to the right side of the sentence, the main verb plus any objects, complements, or modifiers. For instance, Aristotle, in his book on the art of rhetoric, writes a statement, or logos, is composed of a noun, an onoma, and a verb, a rima. And so he defines a sentence as a subject and a predicate. Informed writers frequently memorize the four kinds of clauses, which is the subject of this lesson, this presentation. First, there's the main or independent clause. That is always a complete independent sentence that can stand on its own. Second is the adverb or subordinate clause, which always begins with a subordinating conjunction. Third is the adjective or relative clause, which always begins with a relative pronoun. And fourth, the noun clause, which frequently begins with an interrogative pronoun. Form and function are helpful categories for describing language and literature. Form refers to what it is and how to compose it, and function, what it does and how it creates meaning. So consider applying this heuristic of form and function when analyzing language and literature, what it is and what it does toward developing insights. Main clause as form. A main clause is independent of other clauses. It stands on its own and supports various dependent clauses. A main clause has a subject and a predicate. That is, a subject on the left and on the right a finite verb plus any objects or complements and attached modifiers. A main clause will not begin with a subordinating conjunction or a relative pronoun. Well, sentence patterns are illustrated by main clauses and categorized by type of verb. And there are three types of verbs here: linking verbs, intransitive verbs, and transitive verbs. So let's work through this important table to illustrate the main sentence patterns in English. First is the linking verb, where you have this structure: subject, linking verb, and subject complement. And notice that the predicate on the right side of the sentence is not an object but a subject complement. So for instance, A, they are neighbors, where neighbors is a predicate noun, or also called a predicate nominative. Next, there he is, or it is he. We don't write it is him, but it is he, because he is a predicate noun or a predicate nominative. C, they are thankful, where thankful is a predicate adjective, which describes they. And finally, D, they are forgotten, where forgotten is a past participle of the verb forgot or forget, and it forms the passive voice, which is formed with a form of the verb to be and the past participle of the verb. And here a linking verb indicates a state of being, and so there is no action, there is no voice, and so we call that passive voice. Second, intransitive verbs indicate that there's no object because there is no transportation or a transference of an action through intransitive verbs. But we often include adverbs after intransitive verbs. And so they're formed with subject, verb, and any adverb afterwards, such as there or she writes creatively, he thinks critically, they work well together, where she writes, he thinks, and they work as the subject and the verb. We could put the period there to complete the sentence, but people often add adverbs afterwards, like creatively, critically, or well together. The third kind of verb is probably the most common, and that is the transitive verb, the action verb. And we talk about subject, verb, object syntax. For example, she believes it. All writing has a purpose and a point of view, where we have subject, verb, object. Another kind is the sentence pattern, subject, verb, indirect object, with a direct object afterwards. For instance, writers give characters a sense of agency, where characters is the indirect object. And finally, subject, verb, direct object, and object complement. For instance, the reporter called the event a fiasco, where a fiasco describes the event further, and so we call that an object complement. Main clauses. All sentences need a main clause to be considered a statement, that is, a grammatically complete sentence rather than a sentence fragment. A main clause expresses a complete statement or proposition consisting of a subject and a predicate, the left side and the right side of the sentence. A main clause acts like the main pillar of a structure, supporting all the other subordinate and dependent clauses and phrases that may be attached to it. Dependent clauses and phrases lean upon the main clause for their meaning. A second category of clauses is the adverb clause. Adverb clauses are subordinate clauses beginning with subordinating conjunctions, functioning as adverbs. 3 examples. When the well is dry, comma, we know the worth of water. Or, we know the worth of water while the well is dry. And C, we know the worth of water unless the well is full. And in the table are subordinating conjunctions introducing adverb clauses. And one should become well familiar with the subordinating conjunctions in this table. Well, adverb clauses and punctuation. Writers punctuate adverb clauses according to 3 general rules. First, place a comma between an introductory adverb clause and the main clause. Second, but not between the main clause and a subsequent adverb clauses. And third, unless the subsequent adverb clause expresses contrast to the main clause. Examples: since they studied the problem for a decade, comma, government agencies can show from the vast data that texting while driving is extremely dangerous. Next, agencies communicate the data in creative ways so that, and so that begins my adverb clause, drivers will get the message. And third, some drivers continue to text and drive, comma, even though, and that's my adverb clause expressing contrast, even though they are nominally aware of the risk. And again, writers do well to become familiar with the subordinating conjunctions in the table at the bottom. Well, adverb clauses modify verbs, adverbs, and adjectives in other clauses, signifying dynamic relationships by addressing the pertinent questions of when, where, why, how, under what conditions, and to what degree. So, causality, temporality, and precedence. Cause-effect relationships and indications of purpose are indicated by adverb clauses. For example, if sodium is added, the solution becomes unstable. Or temporality, events and states before or after one another are indicated by adverb clauses. For instance, we discussed form before considering function. And precedence, events and states arranged in hierarchies of importance are indicated by adverb clauses. The books I read in college, rather than those I was assigned in high school, have influenced the choices I find myself making today. Our third kind of clause is adjective clause. Adjective, or also called relative clauses, are dependent clauses that begin with relative pronouns or relative adverbs that function like single-word adjectives and that are placed immediately following the noun or pronoun modified. As in this example, I have placed in black the word that because I have modified my main clause with three relative adjective clauses indicated by the word that, which is my relative pronoun. Another example, at Christian colleges, where both education and faith are valued, people think highly of the faith-reason relationship. Quote from the book of Hebrews, "For by faith we understand," close quote. So writers become familiar with relative pronouns introducing adjective clauses, including the words that, which, who, whom, whose, and some adverbs, when, where, and why. Well, as adjectives, relative clauses modify, that is, further define or describe, nouns or pronouns that precede them. Example, William Wordsworth, who was a writer of the Romantic era, who was a liberal turned conservative, and whose writing earned him laurel leaves as the poet laureate of England, shaped how language is used today. So here I interrupt my subject and my verb with three relative adjective clauses. And I set them off with commas because they're non-restrictive. That is, they do not define William Wordsworth, but just elaborate or describe who he was. Well, a later lesson on distinguishing modifiers discusses how to differentiate between restrictive and non-restrictive adjective clauses, which is important for meaning and placing punctuation. But the basic rule is this. Use commas to set off non-restrictive, that is, non-essential or non-defining elements. Do not use commas to set off restrictive, that is, essential or non-defining, just descriptive elements. A non-restrictive clause, which merely adds non-essential information to a sentence, always needs commas surrounding it or setting it off. A restrictive clause that defines a term does not require commas, as these sentences illustrate. Our fourth kind of clause is called the noun clause. A noun clause acts just like a single word noun or pronoun in a sentence. So a noun clause forms parts of other clauses as a subject, complement, or object. Certain clue words are what form and start noun clauses, including interrogative pronouns, relative pronouns, and subordinating words listed in the chart below. Noun clauses are sometimes called embedded questions because they usually start with an interrogative pronoun. For example, whoever understands has insight, and whoever understands is a noun clause that functions just like a single word. For instance, I could say, he has insight, rather than whoever. So, to determine if a clause is indeed a noun clause, try replacing the clause with a pronoun. Example, do you ever forget what you're looking for? And I can replace the noun clause, what are you looking for, with it. Do you ever forget it? And so in the chart at the bottom are words introducing noun clauses. A noun clause functions just like a single word noun or pronoun in a sentence. Noun clauses are not dependent in the same sense as adjective and adverb clauses. for they are not modifiers. Rather, what makes noun clauses dependent is that they form parts of other clauses and cannot stand alone. So you find noun clauses within main clauses and within adverb and adjective clauses. Here are some examples. Whoever gossips to you, that's my noun clause, will also gossip about you. We never forget how much he loved us, and so the predicate is a noun clause. Or, what history teaches us is that we have never learned anything from it, a witty adage, whether or not it is true, by Georg Wilhelm Hegel, the great German philosopher. Note how interrogative pronouns like what function as the subject of the noun clause itself, but how relative pronouns like the word that do not perform a significant function in the noun clause other than introducing it. Since a noun clause functions just like a single word noun or pronoun, a noun clause can form the subject, complement, or object in any sentence, as illustrated in the following simple sentences. What is in black is the noun clause. What you see is what you get. What I love determines who I become. How one reads shapes what one reads. That he tried his best is what is most important. Why one acts is as important as whether one acts. So these are all proverbial kind of expressions expressed with noun clauses. A famous series of noun clauses starts John's first epistle, which is found at the end of the New Testament. What was from the beginning, what we have heard, what we have seen with our eyes, what we have looked at in our hands, and have touched with our hands, concerning the word of life. What we have seen and heard we proclaim to you also. And so John is describing Jesus Christ as the word of life, the word from beginning, who became flesh, who was incarnated. Let's discuss elliptical clauses, which are not another kind of clause, but of a modification of the other four kinds of clauses. Ellipsis comes from the Greek ellipsis, which means omission or elision, and means that words are missing from a clause. An elliptical clause is a concise, often stylish clause with missing words, which nonetheless are easily implied from the context and the main clause. Elliptical adverb clauses are very common in English, consisting of a verbal phrase that suggests but omits the actor. But writers take care, because there can be a problem. When writing elliptical adverb clauses, dangling modifiers should be avoided. Oops, someone wrote a dangling modifier in this sentence. So let's revise it. When writing elliptical adverb clauses, a writer, and that's what fixes it, is placing the subject who's capable of writing as the grammatical subject in the main clause. A writer should avoid dangling modifiers. So to repair dangling modifiers, one can A, name the actor in the subject of the main clause, which is what I did to repair the dangling modifier, or B, name the actor in the elliptical adverb clause. Well, elliptical clauses can be composed of all kinds of sentence patterns, but the following kinds are fairly common: elliptical comparative phrases, elliptical adverb clauses, elliptical adjective clauses, elliptical noun clauses, and elliptical independent clauses in compound sentences. Examples of elliptical comparative phrases. Is there a difference in meaning between one and the other of the following? And what's implied and elliptical here is the word sentences. Second, he likes you more than me. And what's implied in elliptical is the phrase he likes you more than he likes me. And third, he likes you more than I. And what's elliptical is the verb do, or he likes you more than I like you, or I do. And so these are examples of elliptical comparative phrases that are part of main clauses. Examples of elliptical adverb clauses. When reading these sentences, can you determine which words are missing from the subordinate clause? Well, here, what's elided or missing but implied is the helping verb and the subject. when you are reading these sentences. Second, while beginning college, students find that their most valuable skill is the ability to craft a clear sentence. So in the elliptical adverb clause, what is missing is the subject and the helping verb. While students are beginning college, and from the New Testament we find, though perplexed, we do not despair. And what is implied in elliptical is the subject and the helping verb. Okay, though we are perplexed, we do not despair. And so in each case, the elliptical element is something of a time-saving device or a style of concision, leaving words out that are implied in the main clause, but one has to be careful that what's implied in the elliptical clause is made clear in the main clause. Now note that elliptical adverb clauses are often called modifiers because they modify the main clause, and subsequent lessons, such as avoiding dangling modifiers, build upon familiarity with clauses and even elliptical clauses. Let's look at examples of elliptical adjective clauses. What relative pronoun is missing, which is easily supplied by the reader? Yes, and I've placed in black what is elliptical but implied. Those who were addressing the crowd never got their attention, or those addressing the crowd never got their attention. Or again, James, called James the Just in the New Testament, indicates salvation is by faith alone, but real faith is never merely alone. And here the relative pronoun that is implied, and I think in the last example it's a better sentence if the word that is included because it shows the parallelism. James indicates that salvation is by faith alone, but that real faith is never merely alone. Elliptical compound sentences, some examples. Elliptical independent clauses in compound sentences, and this syntactical style is classically called zeugma, which is a Greek word meaning yoke because the compound sentences are yoked together, but there are some words missing. Examples: their skills are strong and their evaluations excellent. Or from the Proverbs of Solomon, my fruit is better than gold, yes, than fine gold, and my revenue than choice silver. And what's elliptical here is the phrase is better. Again, excellent speech becometh not a fool, much less do lying lips becometh a prince. Right? So it's more concise and it flows as an elliptical sentence. Or from the rhetorician and statesman Cicero, his lust conquered shame, his boldness fear, his madness reason. Or again, in the Victorian era, the writer J.L. Basford writes the following: one who uses many periods is a philosopher, many interrogations, a student, many exclamations, a fanatic. And in this case, you can see how many elements are elliptical but implied, often implied by the comma. So these are some good examples of elliptical compound sentences, and you might study them further if you wish. Elliptical noun clauses, which are similar to elliptical compound sentences because a noun clause functions just like a regular noun or pronoun in a sentence. So an example from the Apostle Paul, which is quite a stylish example. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever things are true, whatever holy, whatever just, whatever pure, whatever lovely, whatever esteemed, if any excellence and if any praise, think about such things. And what is explicit in the main clause, or in the first noun clause, whatever things are true, okay? Things are is what is implied in each of the subsequent noun clauses. Well, the translation is my rather literal gloss following the syntax of the Greek New Testament, because in most English translations they spell out each of the noun clauses, but in Paul's original he's composed it of several elliptical noun clauses. And this stylish elliptical sentence is also a periodic sentence having multiple subordinate elements That is 6 elliptical noun clauses and 2 elliptical adverb clauses preceding the main clause, which comes last. But here is a modern example. How you think is on the outside, how you feel on the inside. So that is what I want to understand, explains a political and advertising consultant. Well, what are some applications? Well, writing is its own application, but can you identify and write examples of the 4 kinds of clauses? The main clause, adverb clause, adjective clause, and noun clause? Can you style an elliptical clause? Well, you might take a look at the clauses in review and any of the slides in this presentation, which I hope you have enjoyed. So learn and enjoy.